Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Wednesday, March 18th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. It is going to be a scorcher in Riverside today with a high reaching 97.2 degrees and a low dipping down to 73.8. If you are heading out, please remember to stay cool and find some shade while you are on the go. On today's episode, we have a lot to get to. We are taking a close look at the specific events and underlying tensions that triggered the latest full-scale war in the Middle East. We will also explore the legislative efforts in El Salvador to rewrite the constitution to permit permanent imprisonment and what this legal shift means for the nation. Plus, we will cover several other important headlines from around the globe. All this and more coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. We begin this morning with a conflict that has reshaped the Middle East in under 3 weeks. A full-scale regional war between Israel and Iran has reached a dangerous new peak after back-to-back Israeli assassination strikes and a massive Iranian missile retaliation. Ethan covers national security for us and has been tracking this story around the clock. Ethan, bring us up to speed on what triggered this latest escalation.
So the big development overnight is that Israel killed 2 of Iran's most powerful remaining leaders. The Associated Press, through CBS 8 San Diego and Oregon Public Broadcasting, confirms that Ali Larijani, the secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, was killed in an airstrike on the eastern outskirts of Tehran while visiting family. In a separate strike in central Tehran, Israel also took out General Gholam Reza Soleimani, who commanded the Revolutionary Guard's Be'er volunteer force. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu both confirmed the operations, saying the goal is to dismantle Iran's command structure and spark an internal uprising.
Help us understand why Larijani specifically was such a significant target.
He'd essentially become the man running the war. Al Jazeera noted that after Ayatollah Khamenei was assassinated on February 28th, Larijani stepped in as the de facto wartime manager of the entire Iranian state. He was the one coordinating between military branches, the political establishment, and the Revolutionary Guard. With him gone, analysts say there's now a strategic vacuum at the very top of Iran's war effort.
And Iran didn't wait long to respond. What do we know about the retaliation?
It was enormous. Al Jazeera identifies it as Operation True Promise 4, and Iran launched it almost immediately after confirming the assassinations. The Revolutionary Guard deployed advanced multiple warhead cluster missiles, specifically the Khorramshahr 4 and Qadr models. These are designed to saturate Israel's layered air defenses, including the Arrow and David's sling systems. It's a clear signal that Iran wanted to overwhelm the interceptors, rather than just lob symbolic projectiles.
Did those missiles get through? What kind of damage are we talking about in Israel?
They did get through in places. The barrage targeted central Israel, including Tel Aviv, and Al Jazeera reports that 2 people, a couple in their 70s, were killed in the city of Ramat Gan. There was also significant damage at a Tel Aviv train station. What's really alarming, though, is that Al Jazeera says Israeli citizens are growing increasingly concerned that air raid sirens aren't giving them enough warning time. That suggests these newer Iranian missiles are faster or following flight paths that compress the reaction window.
This wasn't limited to Israel, though, was it?
Not at all, and that's what makes this a true regional war now. OPB and CBS 8 report that Iran also fired at Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the UAE. A ballistic missile was intercepted over Saudi Arabia's Prince Sultan Air Base, which hosts American forces. In the UAE, projectiles struck an oil facility in Fujairah and landed near an Australian military base. 1 person was confirmed killed in Abu Dhabi. Iran is clearly sending a message to any nation it views as enabling Israel.
And there was an attack on U.S. forces in Iraq, too?
3 Iranian drones targeted the U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad. 2 were intercepted, but the 3rd crashed inside the compound and sparked a massive fire. That's a direct strike on American sovereign territory, and it ratchets up the pressure on the White House enormously. At least 13 U.S. service members have now been killed since this war began on February 28th.
Let's back up and talk about Iran's government. We mentioned the supreme leader was assassinated last month. Who's actually in charge right now?
That's one of the most unsettling parts of this whole crisis. Fox News and The Guardian reported that Ayatollah Khamenei was killed on February 28th in what Israel called Operation Epic Fury. 9 days later, on March 9th, the Assembly of Experts elected his son, Mojtaba Khamenei, as the third supreme leader. But here's the thing. The New York Times, citing U.S. intelligence, reports that Mojtaba hasn't appeared in public or even on video since his appointment. There are serious rumors he was severely wounded or disfigured in the same strike that killed his father.
So if the new supreme leader can't govern, who's making the decisions?
Iran is being managed by a patchwork of leaders. There's an interim leadership council made up of President Masoud Pezeshkian, Chief Justice Gholam Hossein Mohseni Ejei, and Guardian Council Representative Alireza Arafi. But the actual military direction of the war has reportedly fallen to Ahmad Vahidi, who took over as commander-in-chief of the Revolutionary Guard after previous top commanders were killed. Now with Larijani gone too, there's real concern about whether anyone can effectively coordinate Iran's military branches and its political leadership at the same time.
What is all of this doing to the global economy? I know oil markets have been in turmoil.
The Strait of Hormuz is essentially paralyzed. About 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas flows through that waterway, and Iran has restricted access for the U.S., Israel, and their allies. Iran says the strait is technically open, but it's struck roughly 20 vessels so far. According to the International Energy Agency and Al Jazeera, Brent crude surged past $100 a barrel in early March and peaked at around $126. Prices have since pulled back to between $92 and $95, but only because the IEA authorized a historic emergency release of 400 million barrels.
Has there been any coordinated international response to secure that shipping lane?
President Trump has pushed NATO and European allies to help secure the strait, but he's been rebuffed. The EU's top diplomat Kaja Kallas made the bloc's position pretty clear. She said, quote, "This is not Europe's war," end quote. That diplomatic friction is significant because it means the U.S. and its regional partners are largely handling this on their own, which stretches military resources even thinner.
There's also a nuclear safety angle to this. What happened at the Bushehr plant?
Yesterday, March 17th, the Bushehr nuclear power plant was hit by a projectile. The International Atomic Energy Agency initially said there was no damage, but there's a big caveat. The Moscow Times and other sources clarify that the IAEA's assessment was based entirely on Iranian government data and remote monitoring. As of this morning, the agency hasn't been able to conduct an independent on-site inspection because Iran's internet connectivity is down to about 1%, and the fighting makes physical access nearly impossible. So we really don't know the full picture yet.
That's deeply concerning. What about the broader human toll, since this started less than 3 weeks ago?
The numbers are staggering for such a short conflict. Iran has seen over 1,300 killed, and the government is intensifying domestic crackdowns, including executing people it accuses of being Mossad spies. In Lebanon, over 900 people have been killed and roughly 1 million displaced. That's about 20% of Lebanon's entire population, as Israel strikes Hezbollah targets in Beirut and Nabatea. In Israel, 14 people have been killed by Iranian fire, and as I mentioned, at least 13 American service members have lost their lives.
Is there any sign this cycle of escalation might slow down?
Unfortunately, no U.S. Central Command responded to Operation True Promise 4 by dropping 5,000-pound deep penetrator bombs on Iranian missile sites along the coastline. That's one of the heaviest conventional munitions in the American arsenal. Every major strike triggers a response, and every response triggers a counterstrike. With Iran's leadership fractured, the Strait of Hormuz choked, and nuclear safety questions unanswered, it's hard to see a diplomatic off-ramp emerging anytime soon.
A truly alarming situation. Ethan, thank you for walking us through all of that.
Of course, Grace.
We'll continue to follow developments throughout the day. Still ahead, our second story this morning. Our second story this morning takes us to El Salvador, where lawmakers just approved a major constitutional change. Chloe, what happened yesterday?
Yesterday, El Salvador's Congress voted 59-60 to amend Article 27 of the Constitution. According to ABC News and Fine Day Radio, that vote eliminates the country's long-standing ban on what the Constitution called perpetual punishment. So for the first time, judges can now sentence people convicted of murder, rape, or terrorism to life behind bars. Previously, even though cumulative sentences could technically add up to hundreds of years, the law capped actual time served at 60 years.
And this passed through Congress pretty quickly, didn't it?
It really did. Legal experts cited by ABC News say the amendment was pushed through a fast-track mechanism created back in 2024. That mechanism lets the same legislature both approve and ratify constitutional changes in a single term. Traditionally, a second elected assembly would have had to ratify any amendment, but President Bukele's Nuevas Ideas party dominates Congress, so there is very little resistance. He even took to social media afterward, essentially daring anyone to argue that the Constitution should protect violent criminals from permanent imprisonment.
So what's driving this? Why does Bukele feel life sentences are necessary now?
Context is everything here. El Salvador currently has the highest incarceration rate on the planet. Since Bukele declared a state of exception back in March of 2022, his government has arrested roughly 91,300 people. ABC News and Tico Times report that's more than 1% of the total population. Some estimates put it closer to 1.7 or even 1.9%. Among adult men specifically, nearly 3 out of every 100 are currently behind bars.
And that state of exception was supposed to be temporary, right?
Exactly. It started as a 30-day emergency measure after a horrific weekend in March 2022, when 87 people were murdered. But it's been renewed nearly 50 times over the past 4 years. Under this decree, fundamental rights remain suspended. People can be arrested without being told why. They don't have guaranteed access to an attorney. Even the privacy of their communications is gone. So this has been the reality in El Salvador for 4 straight years now, and life sentences just add another layer to it.
Now, this isn't just an internal matter anymore. The United States is involved too. What can you tell us about that?
That's the part of this story that really shifts the scale. On March 7th, so about 11 days ago, there was a summit in Miami called the Shield of the Americas. Following that summit, the Trump administration has framed El Salvador's constitutional changes as a sovereign internal decision. Al Jazeera and AP News report that one major outcome was the creation of the Americas Counter-Cartel Coalition, or ACCC. It's a multinational military alliance that uses what officials describe as lethal hard power to dismantle transnational criminal organizations. Analysts say yesterday's life sentence amendment gives that coalition its legal teeth.
Legal teeth how?
Because cartel leaders captured during joint operations can now be permanently held in El Salvador. Without life sentences on the books, there was a legal ceiling on how long anyone could be locked up. That ceiling is now gone. So if the coalition captures a high-value target, El Salvador can warehouse that person indefinitely without violating its own supreme law. It essentially turns the country into an anchor point for long-term detention across the hemisphere.
And there's also a financial arrangement with the U.S. involving prisoners, isn't there?
There is. Mexico News Daily and the Lufkin Daily News report that under what's being called the Doral Charter, the United States is now paying El Salvador to house high-risk deportees and gang members. We're talking about people tied to MS-13 and Tren de Aragua being sent to Salvadoran facilities. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has praised this as a way to outsource incarceration of violent offenders at a fraction of what it would cost domestically. Analysts specifically noted that the constitutional amendment was a necessary prerequisite. Without it, El Salvador couldn't legally accept indefinite or life detainees from the U.S.
So where are these detainees actually being held? What do we know about the conditions?
Many of the most high-profile prisoners are in a facility called CCOT, the Terrorism Confinement Center. It was designed to hold 40,000 inmates. The government puts out polished propaganda videos showing order and control. But reports from Human Rights Watch, CBS News, and Amnesty International describe something very different. Inmates are reportedly kept in windowless cells, packed with 80 to 100 people, sleeping on 4-tier metal bunks with no mattresses, and allowed only 30 minutes of daily exercise within their modules.
Are prisoners able to communicate with anyone outside?
No, and that's one of the most alarming aspects. There are no family visits, no phone calls, and no access to lawyers. Legal proceedings happen through mass video hearings involving hundreds of defendants at once. So you have people who've been cut off from the outside world entirely, with no real individual due process. The government claims no one has died inside CICAT, but the NGO Socorro Jurídico Humanitario has documented at least 4 deaths there. Across the entire prison system, at least 488 detainees have died in state custody since March 2022, with allegations of torture and medical neglect.
That's a staggering number. Now, critics say this goes beyond security policy. What are they pointing to?
They see a broader pattern of democratic erosion. ABC News and Fine Day Radio report that Bukele has already eliminated presidential term limits, which means he can stay in power indefinitely. Many legal scholars consider his current term unconstitutional. So when you combine indefinite presidential power with mass incarceration and now life sentences, critics argue the entire system of checks and balances has been dismantled. This isn't just about fighting gangs anymore in their view. It's about consolidating control over every branch of government and the justice system itself.
And there are questions about how this whole crackdown started in the first place, aren't there?
There are, and this is where the story gets really complicated. Investigative reporting by El Faro and The Guardian has challenged the official narrative. The government says the March 2022 massacre was an unprovoked crisis that demanded an emergency response. But evidence uncovered by those outlets suggests the violence was actually the collapse of a secret, years-long pact between the Bukele administration and gang leaders. When the government reportedly failed to uphold certain promises, the gangs launched a killing spree to demonstrate their power. Bukele then used that tragedy to justify a permanent state of emergency.
Has there been any fallout from those revelations?
For journalists and activists, absolutely. Many of the people who've investigated or spoken out about the secret pact have been forced into exile to avoid imprisonment. Political critics have also been targeted under the broad umbrella of the state of exception, so the very tools designed to fight gangs are being used against dissenting voices. It creates a chilling effect, where questioning the government's narrative can have serious personal consequences.
So stepping back, where does all of this leave El Salvador right now?
As of today, El Salvador is a global outlier. You have a nation where mass incarceration and life sentences have become the primary tools of governance. Nearly 2% of the population is behind bars. A state of emergency has been in effect for 4 years with no end in sight. And now there's a powerful military alliance with the United States that financially and strategically reinforces the whole system. Whether you see this as a model for fighting organized crime or a cautionary tale about authoritarian overreach really depends on which side of those prison walls you're standing on.
Chloe, this is a deeply complex story. Thank you for walking us through all of it.
Thanks, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. On Monday, March 16, 2026, the island of Cuba was left quite literally in the dark after the national electricity grid suffered a total collapse. It was a shocking turn of events that plunged approximately 10 million people into a nationwide blackout lasting over 29 hours. The Ministry of Energy and Mines reported a complete disconnection of the system, which officials attribute to antiquated infrastructure and severe fuel shortages. These shortages have been sparked by a United States oil blockade that has left the island with less than 40% of the fuel required for its aging power plants. While workers successfully restarted the Antonio Guterres power plant to reconnect the grid by 6:11 p.m. on Tuesday, March 17th, the situation remains incredibly fragile. Officials warned that generation capacity is still dim compared to national demand, and residents should prepare for 16 to 48-hour daily outages. This marks the sixth time the grid has lost its spark in just 18 months, leading to rare and heated social unrest. In the city of Moron, protesters reportedly threw stones and started fires at the Communist Party headquarters, expressing their frustration as tens of thousands of surgeries were postponed and food supplies spoiled in the tropical heat. In the midst of this power struggle, the geopolitical climate is reaching a boiling point. President Trump has asserted that he expects to have the honor of taking Cuba in some form, explicitly labeling the territory a failed and weakened nation. During remarks at the White House and aboard Air Force One, the president suggested the United States could free or take the island, noting that while action would happen pretty quickly, the administration intends to finish its current operations in Iran first. This shift toward a policy of forced regime change is being spearheaded by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who has confirmed that removing President Miguel Díaz-Canel is now a primary objective. The administration has made the president's resignation a central condition for lifting economic sanctions, demanding his departure to clear the way for structural reforms. In response, President Díaz-Canel has vowed unbreakable resistance against what he calls a fierce economic war and collective punishment. Turning to the economy, the Federal Reserve is overwhelmingly expected to keep things stationary today. Markets are pricing in a nearly 100% probability that the benchmark interest rate will remain between 3.50% and 3.75%. Policymakers are navigating a complex double whammy as they deal with the softening labor market, which saw a loss of 92,000 jobs in February, and a sudden energy price shock caused by the outbreak of the United States-Iran war on February 28. While core inflation remains elevated at 3.1%, the central bank is also preparing for a leadership change as Jerome Powell's term concludes in May. With Kevin Warsh nominated to take the lead, analysts worry the geopolitical instability may force the Fed to wash away any hopes of rate cuts this year. Investors are waiting for the two-page policy statement to see if the Fed will adopt a higher-for-longer stance, potentially delaying any relief for the housing and tech sectors until 2027. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.